My name is Margaret Ellis, and I am 61 years old. For most of my life, I believed the worst was behind me. I had survived losing my husband at 29 to a sudden heart attack. I had raised my son Daniel, alone in a cramped one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. I had worked double shifts at the seafood cannery in Portland, Maine, my hair smelling of brine and bleach, my hands cracked from cold salt water. I'd walked home under winter snow, carrying bags of discounted groceries so Daniel could have warm dinners. I thought I had already paid my dues. I thought family meant safety. I thought wrong. That July morning, sunlight streamed through the lace curtains of the small living room in the home I helped Daniel and his wife Brianna buy 6 years ago. The ocean breeze drifting in from the harbor carried the scent of seaweed and salt, the smell of home to me. Brianna sat across from me, her tanned legs crossed neatly, a glossy cruise brochure spread across her lap. Daniel stood in the kitchen doorway, sipping coffee, watching. "We want to take a 25-day anniversary cruise," Brianna began, her voice smooth, polished like the pearls she wore. "The total's $50,000. We'll need you to cover it." At first, I thought she was joking. $50,000. Brianna, that's more than I've ever spent on myself in a year. Her smile didn't falter. "It's an investment in family memories." "No," I said, my voice steady, my back straight. "I won't pay for that." The silence that followed was heavy. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, the faint hum of the refrigerator. "Excuse me." Her tone sharpened like a blade. "You heard me." I said no. She stood, her shadow falling over me. "This isn't a request, Margaret. I understand perfectly," I replied. Still no. The slap came so fast I didn't see her hand move. A hot sting bloomed across my cheek. Then, as if that weren't enough, she leaned forward and hissed, "Then find somewhere else to live." I'm done supporting a selfish old woman. I turned to my son, my Daniel, the boy I had walked to kindergarten holding hands, the man I had sat up all night with during his college finals, brewing coffee so he could keep studying. I waited for him to speak up, to tell his wife she had crossed a line. Instead, he looked away. "Maybe it's time you found your own place, Mom. We've been carrying you long enough." Carrying me. I'd been paying rent every month. I'd bought most of the groceries. I'd helped with utilities. I'd even given them the down payment for their car, on top of the $20,000 I'd handed over for their wedding. His next words landed like a final blow. "I'll need that $50,000 plus whatever else you've saved. Think of it as paying us back." I rose slowly, gripping my purse. "I'll pack my things." My voice was calm, but inside something cracked. I climbed the narrow stairs to my small room. Every step a reminder of the years I'd poured into Daniel's life. I saw flashes of the past me at 25, rocking him to sleep after a 16-hour shift. Me skipping meals so he could have seconds. Me paying his first semester's tuition in full. Driving my beat-up Corolla instead of buying something safer because I wanted him debt-free. By the time I reached my door, I knew this wasn't just about a cruise. It was about a lifetime of giving to people who saw my sacrifices as their right, not my love. I folded my clothes slowly, because each piece told a story. My navy sweater that had kept me warm during winter walks home from the cannery. The floral scarf a co-worker gave me one Christmas when I couldn't afford to exchange gifts. Everything I owned fit into 2 suitcases and one battered cardboard box of photo albums. Downstairs, I could hear Brianna on the phone, her voice light and cheerful now that I was leaving. "Yes, Mom. She's finally agreed to move out. We'll have the house to ourselves. And maybe she'll still help with the cruise, as a parting gift." I paused on the stairs, the words slicing deep. She was already rewriting the story, painting herself as the generous one, and me as the unwanted guest who left willingly. Daniel didn't even come out of his office to say goodbye. Outside, the salty air hit my face. I loaded my things into the trunk of my 15-year-old sedan, its faded blue paint peeling in places. At least it was mine, free and clear, I sat behind the wheel, staring down the quiet street lined with white, painted houses and blooming hydrangeas. Behind those doors, I imagined families laughing, sharing meals. And here I was, 61, unwanted, with nowhere to go. I turned the key and the engine coughed to life. I drove with no destination, just letting the coastal road carry me. Past the cannery where I had spent half my life. Past the park where I'd once pushed Daniel on the swings. Past the small cafe where I used to treat myself to coffee after payday. Every corner of this town was soaked in memories. But tonight, none of them felt like mine anymore. By nightfall, I pulled into the lot of a 24-hour diner. I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, my cheek still red from the slap, my eyes swollen from tears. I looked exactly like what I was, a woman discarded by her own child. But beneath the ache, something else stirred. Not forgiveness, not despair. Something sharper, resolve. And that was the beginning. I didn't sleep much that night. The diner coffee kept me awake, but it wasn't the caffeine. It was the swirl of anger, betrayal, and a strange emptiness I couldn't quite name. By dawn, I was still sitting in my car, parked in the same spot, staring at the neon sign flickering in the mist. When the sun began to rise, I decided I couldn't spend another day circling the same streets. My hands turned the wheel almost on their own, guiding me toward the coast. The sky was a pale watercolor of peach and silver, the tide low enough to expose dark ribbons of seaweed. I followed the road until it ended at the Portland Marina, a place I hadn't visited in years. Rows of fishing boats bobbed gently, their names painted in chipped letters. Gulls wheeled overhead, their cries sharp in the cool morning air. And at the far end of the dock, towering above everything else, was a gleaming white ship. Not a fishing vessel, but something out of a travel magazine. Its hull sparkled in the early sun, and the name Aurora Mist curved elegantly across the side. Workers bustled on deck, loading crates and polishing railings. It looked untouchable, like a world I didn't belong in. And then I saw him, tall, broad-shouldered, silver hair that caught the light. He was wearing a white uniform jacket, the kind you'd see in glossy brochures, gold stripes on the sleeves, a captain's crest on the breast. I squinted, thinking my mind was playing tricks. But when he turned, my breath caught. Tom Harrington. 42 years ago, Tom had been my closest friend in high school, the boy who drove me home after late shifts at the diner, who taught me how to tie a fishing knot, who once told me he'd take me around the world, if we ever made it big. Life had pulled us in different directions after graduation. I hadn't seen him since. Now here he was, standing on the deck of a luxury ship like he belonged there. He spotted me before I could look away. His eyes widened in surprise. And then he grinned. That same crooked grin I remembered. He raised a hand in a wave and called something to a crew member before heading toward the gangway. Margaret Ellis. His voice carried across the dock, warm and steady. I actually laughed, shaking my head. Still Ellis, and yes, it's me. Tom stepped onto the dock and closed the distance between us. Up close, I could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the kind you only get from years of smiling in the sun. You look like you could use a hot breakfast and something stronger than diner coffee, he said, his gaze searching my face. It's that obvious, I asked. I've been at sea long enough to read storms, he replied softly. And you've got one in you right now. Before I knew it, I was following him up the gangway, through gleaming corridors lined with polished wood and soft carpet, until we reached a spacious cabin with a wall of windows overlooking the harbor. It was more luxurious than anywhere I'd ever lived. We sat with steaming mugs of coffee, and for the first time in days, I told the truth out loud, about Daniel, about Brianna, about the slap, the eviction, the years of sacrifices that meant nothing in the end. My voice shook at first, but Tom didn't interrupt. He just listened, his jaw tightening at certain parts. When I finally trailed off, he set his cup down. Margaret, what they did to you. That's not just ungrateful, it's abuse. Emotional. Financial. I started to protest, but he held up a hand. No. You need to hear this. You've been surviving for everyone else for decades. It's time you started living for you. He leaned forward. I'm part owner of Harrington Coastal Voyages. We're launching a new division focused on guest services for our eco cruises. We need someone who knows how to keep things running smoothly, handle people, and solve problems. And from what I've just heard, you've been doing that your whole life. I blinked. Tom, I've never worked on a ship. You've managed a household on next to nothing, stretched a budget until it screamed, and handled more difficult personalities than I'll ever see on board. I can teach you the maritime part. The rest, you already have. I stared out the window at the harbor, the gulls swooping over the water, the sunlight catching on the waves. For the first time since leaving Daniel's house, I felt something shift inside me, a spark of possibility. What do you say? Tom asked. I met his eyes and said quietly, I say, maybe it's time I see what else I can be. 2 days later, I stood in front of a full-length mirror in the crew dressing room, smoothing the lapel of a crisp navy blazer with the Harrington Coastal Voyages crest embroidered in gold. The uniform fit better than I expected. It made me stand taller, almost as if my spine remembered what dignity felt like. Tom had arranged everything quickly. A furnished apartment overlooking the harbor, temporary housing while I trained, and a daily schedule at the company's glass front headquarters. My first morning had been overwhelming binders full of guest service protocols, safety briefings, and endless acronyms I didn't understand. But something strange happened by the end of the week. It started to make sense. Years of stretching a grocery budget taught me cost management. Running a household alone was logistics training I hadn't realized I'd had. All those nights smoothing over cranky customers at the cannery's little gift shop had been conflict resolution practice. I wasn't learning from scratch. I was remembering. By the end of the second week, I was leading small team meetings about passenger feedback. Staff began stopping by my desk for advice. One afternoon, Tom handed me a printed report with glowing comments from 3 different department heads. You're a natural, he said with that crooked grin, and you haven't even been seasick yet, which puts you ahead of half the new hires. I laughed, but inside something warmed. It wasn't charity. It wasn't pity. I was earning this. On a Friday afternoon, Tom called me into his office. Sunlight streamed through the windows, lighting up the nautical charts on the wall. We've got a coastal cruise next month, Maine to Nova Scotia. I want you on board as our guest services coordinator. Think of it as your trial by fire. You'll see everything in action, meet passengers, handle issues in real time. I hesitated. And if I fail? Then you fail trying something new, which is better than staying where you were. I found myself nodding. All right, let's do it. 2 weeks later, I boarded the Aurora Mist again, this time with a cabin of my own on Deck 7, a crisp name badge, and a clipboard full of passenger details. The ship was alive with motion luggage carts rattling across the gangway, crew in white uniforms greeting guests. The hum of conversation layered over the deep vibration of the engines. From my position near the atrium, I watched families posing for photos against the gleaming hull, couples laughing as they sipped welcome cocktails. I moved from group to group, answering questions about dining times, spar appointments, and excursion schedules. Then, as I turned toward the portside gangway, my stomach dropped. There they were. Daniel struggling with 2 oversized suitcases, his shoulders hunched. Brianna, walking ahead in oversized sunglasses, pointing out imagined flaws to a porter. The kind of dismissive hand gestures I'd seen too many times before. They didn't see me. Not yet. I adjusted my blazer, smoothed my expression into something neutral, and stepped forward to greet the next wave of guests. My voice was calm, my smile professional, but inside the tide was shifting. This was my deck now, and they were about to find out. By mid-morning, the Aurora Mist was a small city in motion. The atrium buzzed with new arrivals. the scent of polished wood and fresh flowers blending with the distant hum of engines. I was stationed near the guest services desk, checking in with Maria, the department head, when a sharp, clipped voice cut through the chatter. "There's been a mistake," the voice announced. I didn't have to turn to know who it was. Still, I did, slowly. Brianna stood at the counter, sunglasses pushed up onto her head, her manicured fingers tapping impatiently on the marble surface. Daniel hovered a step behind, pretending to scroll through his phone. Maria looked up from her monitor. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "Yes," Brianna said, enunciating like she was speaking to a child. "We booked a balcony suite, and you've put us in an interior room. That's unacceptable." Maria typed quickly, then turned the screen slightly toward her. "Your confirmation shows an interior cabin. We do have balcony suites available, but there's an upgrade fee of $800 per night." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we should." "We'll take it." Brianna interrupted, her tone decisive. I stepped forward before Maria could reply. "Perhaps I can assist," I said, my voice warm but measured. Brianna turned toward me, and for the briefest moment, I saw confusion flicker across her face. Then it vanished, replaced by the polite smile she used at social events. "I'm Margaret Ellis," I said, offering my hand as though greeting strangers. "Guest Services Coordinator." Daniel glanced up at my name badge, and something in his posture stiffened. He didn't say my name, but his eyes widened. "I do have a balcony suite available due to a last-minute cancellation," I continued. "And as a gesture for your anniversary, I can waive the upgrade fee, on one condition." Brianna arched a brow. "And that is?" "You'll be working directly with me throughout your cruise. Any requests, concerns, or special arrangements will go through me personally." Her lips curved into a triumphant smile. "That sounds perfect." Over the next 2 days, I became their shadow. I booked dinner reservations, arranged spa appointments, secured prime seating for the theater shows. Outwardly, I was nothing but professional, answering every request, no matter how petty, with calm efficiency. But I noticed things. Brianna complained that the towels weren't fluffy enough, that the pool was too crowded, that the wine list didn't include her favorite label. Daniel barely spoke, his eyes on his phone more than the ocean, and behind their cabin door, captured in the ship's routine service logs. Brianna's voice was sharp, cutting into him. "At least when your mother was paying for everything," she said one evening, "we could pretend to be comfortable." By the morning of the third day, I knew this first contact had set the stage. The polite facade wouldn't last forever, and neither would my silence. The real conversation was coming. The third afternoon of the cruise, the Aurora Mist's main dining room was a calm picture of fine hospitality. White tablecloths, crystal glasses. The soft murmur of conversation blending with the pianist's gentle chords. I was halfway across the room when a voice cut through the atmosphere like a blade. "This is ridiculous." Heads turned. At the far corner, Brianna stood over a young waitress. Carmen, a new hire from the Philippines with barely 3 weeks at sea. Carmen's knuckles were white around her order pad. "I told you I wanted the dressing on the side," Brianna said, enunciating every word like she was speaking to a child. "And here it is, poured all over the salad. Do you even understand instructions?" Carmen's voice was small but steady. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I can bring you a fresh. People like you shouldn't be working in hospitality." Brianna interrupted, her tone dripping with disdain. I crossed the room, the heel of my shoes tapping a steady beat against the polished floor. "Is there a problem here?" I asked, my voice calm, but carrying enough weight to quiet nearby tables. Brianna turned to me, relief flickering across her features. "Yes. This waitress messed up my order. I want her fired." I met Carmen's eyes. Carmen is one of our best new staff members. She's followed procedure exactly. There's no cause for dismissal. Brianna's smile thinned. "Are you contradicting me?" "I'm providing accurate information," I said evenly. It was then that Daniel finally looked up from his phone. His gaze landed on me, and for a moment his face went blank, then drained of color. "Mom," he whispered. The dining room went silent. The pianist's fingers froze on the keys. Brianna's head snapped toward him. "What did you just say?" Daniel's voice cracked. "This is my mother." Confusion twisted across Brianna's face, hardening into disbelief. You're supposed to be desperate, begging to come back," I finished for her. "No." Things change. Daniel's jaw worked soundlessly before he managed. "How are you here?" "I work here," I said simply. "I own a stake in this company, guest services coordinator, which means every aspect of your vacation is my responsibility." The weight of the room's attention pressed in. Diners leaning in, forks paused midair. "A's for your complaint?" I continued, turning to Brianna. "Carmen did her job exactly as ordered. I will not be firing her for your mistake. Carmen, please continue your service." She gave me a grateful nod and retreated quickly. Brianna's voice dropped to a hiss. "We need to talk. Now." I didn't move. "About what?" Daniel's voice was shaky. "Mom, we've had financial problems since you left. We might lose the house." "And you think that's my responsibility?" I asked. "We're family," he insisted. "We were family," I corrected. Brianna stepped in. "You have money now, more than enough to help. You've helped before." Daniel frowned sharply. "Before? What do you mean?" And there it was. My first twist. I looked at him, my voice clear. 2 years ago, when you were about to default on the mortgage, Brianna came to me in private. She said she'd pay me back if I covered the 18,000 you owed. I wired it the next day. I never saw it again. Daniel's eyes darted to Brianna. "Is that true?" She blinked slowly, her jaw tight. "It was for us." "It was for you," I cut in. "And you never told him." Murmurs rippled across the dining room. Brianna's composure cracked just enough for me to see the fury beneath. She grabbed her clutch and stormed toward the exit. Daniel followed a few steps behind, glancing back at me with an expression I couldn't read, part shame, part something else. I didn't chase either of them. I had no interest in chasing ghosts. Twist 2 would come 3 nights later. We were docked in Halifax, the evening air smelling of rain on cobblestones. I had just finished my shift and was walking toward my cabin when I saw a familiar silhouette leaning against the corridor wall. Brianna, alone. Her sunglasses were gone, replaced by a hard, direct stare. "You think this is over?" she said quietly. I didn't answer. She stepped closer. "Your company has no idea about that little incident in Maine, do they? The one that happened before you joined. The thing that might make them think twice about putting you in charge of guest services." I felt a cold knot in my stomach. Not because I was guilty, but because I knew exactly what she was trying to do: plant fear, force a reaction, gain back some power. She smiled faintly. "I'll be in touch." And then she walked away into the rain. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the sound of her heels fade. I didn't know yet if her threat was empty, or if she actually had something she could use. But I did know one thing. If she came for me again, I'd be ready. And for the first time in years, I realized I wasn't afraid of her anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. Brianna's voice, low, deliberate, and poisonous, kept replaying in my mind. "Your company has no idea. The thing that might make them think twice about putting you in charge." The rain outside my cabin window streaked the glass, the drops catching reflections of the ship's lights like tiny warning beacons. I knew enough about Brianna to understand she wasn't bluffing for sport. She played long games, the kind designed to corrode you from the inside out. And if she was threatening to expose something, it meant she believed it would stick. The problem was, I couldn't immediately think what she might be talking about. My past was full of hard years, but not scandals. At least, none I would have considered dangerous. Unless she was ready to twist the truth into something it wasn't. By morning, I decided 2 things. I wouldn't go to Tom. Not yet. I didn't want to drop a shadow over my position without knowing exactly what I was dealing with. If Brianna thought she could back me into a corner, I'd make sure she discovered I'd learned a few things since the day she threw me out. 2 days later, as we sailed into Boston Harbor, my plan began. I called Carmen, the same waitress she'd tried to humiliate, into my office. "Carmen, do you remember that afternoon with Mrs. Brianna Ellis?" I asked. Her expression hardened.
"Yes, ma'am."
"I'll never forget. I might need your help. Off the record." Carmen leaned forward. "If it's about her, I'll help however you need." That evening, I went over the ship's security logs and pulled still images from guest service areas where Brianna had interacted with staff. Polished, time-stamped moments, not confrontational enough to raise alarms, but showing her behavior patterns, the belittling gestures, the dismissive waves, the rolled eyes. I also accessed archived booking records from 2 years ago, the ones tied to Daniel's near foreclosure. The transfer from my account to their joint account was there, plain as day, along with a withdrawal to a luxury boutique less than 24 hours later. It was exactly the kind of documented pattern that could turn any threat of hers into a liability for her. By the time we reached Halifax again, I was ready. I found her alone on the promenade deck, looking out over the dark water. "You came back," I said simply. She turned, the faintest smirk on her lips. "I told you I'd be in touch." I stepped closer, my voice low. "You're right. My company doesn't know everything about my past, but they do know I have a file on every high-risk passenger we've ever had. And yours?" I let the pause hang in the air. "Is interesting." Her smirk wavered. I slid a single photo from my blazer pocket, a still from the dining room security feed. It showed her mid-sneer at Carmen, one finger jabbing toward the young woman's chest. The timestamp and location were clearly visible. "This isn't the only one," I said. "You pull that trigger, and I'll show every senior partner exactly how you treat service staff. Then I'll send your spending records from the $18,000 I gave Daniel to him first, just to close the loop." Her jaw tightened. I didn't raise my voice. "Walk away, Brianna, and don't come near my ship again." She held my gaze for a few long seconds, the water slapping softly against the hull below. Then she turned, her heels clicking sharply against the deck, and disappeared into the interior corridors. Later, as the ship cut through the night toward its next port, I stood at the rail alone. I thought about the strange arc my life had taken, from being told to pack my bags, to standing here, untouchable in a way I'd never been before. Brianna had tried to turn the tide against me. Instead, I'd learned I could swim against any current she sent my way. And that knowledge was worth more than any amount I'd ever given her. The next morning, the ship was docked in Bar Harbor, Maine. The early light poured through the windows of my small office, glinting off the polished brass fixtures. I had just finished reviewing the day's passenger activity logs when there was a knock at the door. "Come in," I called. It was Daniel. He closed the door behind him and stood there, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched like a boy bracing for a lecture. "I heard Brianna left the ship last night," he said quietly. I kept my voice neutral. "She decided her trip was over." A flicker of something passed through his eyes, relief maybe, but tangled with guilt. "She told me you threatened her." I leaned back in my chair. "No. I told her the truth, that I wouldn't be intimidated by her." He let out a long breath and sat in the chair opposite me. "Mom, I need to say something, and I'm not sure you'll want to hear it." Daniel spoke haltingly at first, about how, after I left their house months ago, their finances had spiraled. How Brianna kept spending like nothing had changed. How he'd stayed silent because he thought loyalty to his marriage meant absorbing whatever damage came with it. "I thought I was protecting what we had," he said. "But the truth is there was nothing left worth protecting." I watched him closely. "So why tell me this now?" His gaze dropped to the floor. "Because I'm leaving her. For good this time. And I want to try to fix things with you. There was a part of me, the mother who remembered holding his small hand crossing the street, that wanted to reach for him right then. But there was another part, the woman I'd become, that knew wounds didn't close just because someone said they wanted them to. Daniel, I said slowly, you don't get to step back into my life like nothing happened. Trust doesn't grow back on its own. You'd have to earn it. He nodded, almost as if he'd expected that. Then tell me where to start. That's when I gave him the first condition: honesty. All of it, I said. No hiding things to protect me. No stories with missing pieces. He hesitated only a moment before leaning forward, elbows on his knees. Then I need to tell you something Brianna said before she left. Something about a letter. My chest tightened. What letter? She claimed she found it in Dad's old desk. Said it was from you, dated before he died. And that it proves you hid money from him. That was the twist. Because I knew exactly what letter she was talking about. And it wasn't proof of theft. It was something far more complicated. Something I had kept buried for decades. And if Brianna had taken it with her, she might not be done with me after all. For the rest of the morning, the words "letter" echoed in my mind like the low hum of the ship's engines. Brianna had said she found it in Dad's old desk. That meant she'd been digging through things that weren't hers. And she'd been doing it long before she threw me out. Daniel sat across from me, watching for a reaction. I kept my voice even. What exactly did she say? He hesitated. She said it proved you were hiding money from Dad before he died. That maybe you'd been planning to leave him. My fingers tightened around the pen I was holding. Did you see it? He shook his head. No. She said she kept it somewhere safe. I thought she was bluffing. But the way you're looking right now, she wasn't, was she? The truth was complicated. The letter did exist, but not the way Brianna thought. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't even written to my late husband. It was from him. Written during the last month of his life. In it, he admitted something he'd never told me to face that his job at the time was in trouble, that he'd hidden certain debts from me, and that the small investment account he'd told me was for Daniel's college fund had already been drained to keep creditors at bay. At the end, he'd asked me to forgive him and to quietly use the 12,000 I'd saved from my side jobs to reset our finances if he didn't survive the year. It was a private truth between a dying husband and a wife who had promised to protect their son from knowing the full extent of his father's failures. I had honored that promise for over 3 decades. I looked at Daniel, my jaw set. That letter doesn't say what she thinks it does. But if she has it, she could twist it into something ugly. Daniel's brow furrowed. Then why didn't you tell me before? Because, I said quietly, you were a boy when your father died. And I wasn't going to hand you the weight of his mistakes when you'd just lost him. He leaned back, his expression a mix of confusion and something softer. Maybe understanding, maybe shame. That night I took a walk on the upper deck, the wind snapping at my blazer. My mind kept circling the same questions. Where was the letter now? And what exactly was Brianna planning to do with it? Halfway down the promenade, I spotted Carmen coming toward me, carrying a sealed envelope. This was left for you at the front desk, she said. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable, Brianna's. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, Margaret. You didn't think I'd just sail away and let you enjoy your little victory, did you? I have the letter. You know which one. And I've made a few copies. One of which I'm considering sending to your precious business partners. Imagine how quickly they'd start asking questions. But I'm reasonable. I'll give you one chance to buy my silence. We can discuss terms in person. You know where to find me. B. I folded the note slowly, my heartbeat steadying instead of racing. Brianna thought she was holding a weapon. She didn't realize she was holding the very thing that could unravel her. We docked in Portland 3 days later. The air on the pier was damp with the smell of seaweed and diesel fuel, the kind of scent that clung to your coat no matter how quickly you walked away. I'd told no one, not even Tom, about the note. Some storms are best navigated without an audience. Brianna had written, "You know where to find me." I did. There was a boutique hotel near the old wharf, the kind of place she'd pick for its imported linens and overpriced cocktails. When I walked into the lobby, she was already waiting, perched in an armchair like she owned the room. A cream blazer, designer heels, her hair pulled into a flawless twist. She smiled like we were two women meeting for afternoon tea. "Margaret," she said smoothly, "I was starting to think you wouldn't show." I took the seat opposite her. "Let's talk about your price." Her eyes glittered. "Straight to business." "Good, 50,000 should be enough. Considering what I could cost you, it's a bargain." I leaned back, studying her. "You're overestimating the value of that letter. You think it proves theft. What it actually proves is that my late husband left me, holding the bag for debts you never knew existed." That smile of hers faltered, just slightly. "You expect me to believe that," she said. "I don't care if you believe it," I replied. "But I can prove it. The handwriting analysis, the bank records, the dates, all of it lines up. The only thing your copies would do is embarrass you when people find out you tried to blackmail me over a dying man's confession." For a moment, I thought she might keep pressing. Then I slid a second envelope across the table. She hesitated before opening it, and found herself looking at still photos from the ship's security feed, her berating Carmen, time-stamped and dated. Behind those were the transaction records from the 18,000 mortgage rescue that ended up at a luxury boutique. Her voice went colder. "You've been busy. Consider it a mutual deterrent," I said. "You leave me and my company alone, and these never see daylight. But if you make another move, I promise they'll be on the desk of every HR director and client you've ever tried to impress." We stared at each other over the table. The lobby's quiet jazz filled the space between us. Finally, she folded the security photos back into the envelope. "You've changed, Margaret. You used to be softer. I used to mistake softness for safety," I said. "That was my error." She stood, smoothing her blazer. "We'll see how long you can keep that spine of yours." And with that, she walked out, her heels clicking against the marble floor until they faded entirely. I sat there for another minute, not because I doubted my own position, but because I knew Brianna well enough to understand one thing. She'd backed off, but she hadn't surrendered. Out on the pier, the aurora mist was preparing to depart. As I walked back toward her, I felt the wind coming off the water, sharp and cold but bracing. Some threats are like tides. They recede, but they always have a way of returning. I would be ready when she did. The gangway swayed gently under my feet as I stepped back onto the aurora mist. The late afternoon sun was low enough to turn the water to molten gold, but the wind off the harbor was sharp, needling through my coat. I was halfway to my cabin when I heard my name. "Mom." I turned. Daniel stood at the top of the companionway, his hands shoved into the pockets of a worn jacket I hadn't seen in years, the one I'd bought him for his first real job interview. His hair was wind mussed, his eyes shadowed like he hadn't slept well. "We need to talk," he said. "In my cabin." He paced once before speaking. "I know you saw Brianna." I didn't answer. "She called me," he continued. "Told me you made her an offer to keep quiet." His mouth twisted. "That's what she does. Turns everything into a deal she can spin." I sat on the edge of the bed, watching him. "What did she tell you exactly?" "That you have a letter that makes you look guilty. That you're hiding things from me." I exhaled slowly. "And do you believe her?" He stopped pacing. "No, not anymore, because I found something. And I think it's what she didn't want me to see." From his jacket pocket, he pulled a folded sheet of paper, thin, creased at the edges. I was clearing out her office before the movers come. This was in a file labeled House Sale. I unfolded it. It was a copy of a private contract. Brianna had signed it 6 months before she married Daniel. An agreement with a man named Gerald Cross, promising him a percentage of any future marital assets in exchange for a $25,000 loan. It wasn't illegal, but it was ugly. Essentially a secret deal to give away part of whatever wealth she married into. And the notary date proved she'd been planning her financial safety net long before she ever met me. Daniel's voice was tight. She never told me about this. But the more I think about it, the more I wonder if Gerald Cross is still in the picture. And if maybe that's where part of my mortgage money went. I set the paper down on the desk. If that's true, it means she was building an escape plan from the start. And you were just the vehicle. He flinched, but didn't deny it. For a long moment, we both stared at the contract, the quiet hum of the ship filling the space between us. "Mom," Daniel said finally, "I don't know what to do with this. Part of me wants to confront her. Part of me wants to burn it and never think about it again." I looked him straight in the eye. "Don't destroy it. Not yet. Because if she comes after me again, or after you, this might be the one thing that keeps her from taking another step." As he left, I slipped the paper into the same drawer where I kept Brianna's typed threat. The two documents sat there together, quiet for now, but I knew enough about storms to understand. The most dangerous ones aren't the ones you see coming. They're the ones that build far out at sea, gathering strength while you're looking the other way. It was the second evening after Daniel had left the ship. The aurora mist was cutting through calm water on its way to Bermuda. The decks quiet except for the distant laughter from the lounge. I was reviewing tomorrow's excursion schedules in the guest services office when the phone at the counter rang. "Quest at the atrium desk asking for you," Maria said. Her tone had a hint of hesitation. "Says it's personal." I frowned. "Name?" They wouldn't give one. 5 minutes later, I stepped into the atrium. A tall man in a tailored charcoal jacket stood near the potted palms, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. He looked like someone who could blend into a corporate boardroom or a high-stakes poker table with equal ease. The moment his eyes met mine, I knew this wasn't a random passenger. "Ems Ellis," he said smoothly, offering a hand. "My name is David Quinn. I believe we have a mutual acquaintance, Gerald Cross." The name hit like a cold splash. I kept my face still. "I don't know him personally." David smiled slightly. "No, but you know someone who does. Your former daughter-in-law. Gerald and I used to work together. I think you should be aware. He's been asking questions about you." "About me?" I repeated. He nodded. "More specifically, about your position here. Your financial stake in the company. And whether you'd be persuadable." I studied him carefully. "And why are you telling me this?" "Because Gerald doesn't just make idle threats. He leverages. He collects. And if he's after Brianna for what she owes him, you might end up collateral damage." My mind flashed to the contract Daniel had shown me. The one tying Brianna to Gerald years before she married my son. "Let me guess," I said. "You're not here out of the goodness of your heart." David's grin widened. "Let's say I have competing interests with Gerald. And I think you and I could help each other." I didn't answer right away. The hum of the ship's engine seemed louder in the pause between us. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked finally. David glanced toward the panoramic windows, as if making sure no one was close enough to overhear. "Information. You tell me what you have on Brianna, and I'll tell you what Gerald's next move is. Before it hits you." I felt the weight of this moment. If I engaged with him, I'd be stepping into a game with rules I didn't know yet, and with players who were used to burning pieces off the board without blinking. But if I didn't, I might be sailing blind straight into whatever Gerald had planned. "I'll think about it," I said finally. David slipped a plain white card into my hand. No name, no number. Just a single word printed in black ink: vigilance. And then he walked away, leaving me standing in the glow of the atrium lights, the card warm in my palm. If Brianna had been a storm I'd already weathered, Gerald Cross was something else entirely. And now there was a third player on the field. The next morning, the aurora mist docked in Bermuda under a pale sky streaked with clouds. From my cabin balcony, I could see the pastel houses along the shore, the narrow streets winding uphill from the harbor. I had no excursion scheduled. My time today was for something else. Before leaving the ship, I slipped David Quinn's card into my pocket. Vigilance, the single word printed in stark black letters, felt less like a business card and more like a dare. I started at the Fisherman's Wharf, a place I remembered from years ago when I'd visited as a tourist. Weathered men mending nets in the shade, young deckhands hauling crates of snapper onto scales, the smell of diesel and salt heavy in the air. There was a small cafe tucked behind the bait shop, the kind of place where you could sit long enough without ordering much and still pick up more gossip than you bargained for. By the second cup of coffee, I'd already heard Gerald's name twice, once from a grizzled man with a scar running across his chin. Cross. He moves money in and out faster than the tide. Some of it's legit, some of it's not. And once from a younger woman at the counter whispering to a friend, if Cross is sniffing around, it means someone owes him, or he wants a piece of something. I leaned toward the waitress, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a smile that didn't reach them. Do you know Gerald Cross? She didn't blink. Not the kind of man you know, love. You either owe him or avoid him. And if someone owes him, I ask. Her rag paused mid-wipe on the counter. Then sooner or later, they'll pay, in cash, favors, or something uglier. Aback aboard the ship that afternoon, I found David Quinn waiting near the aft observation lounge. He looked perfectly at ease, leaning against the railing, a faint salt mist on his jacket. Enjoy your morning ashore, he asked. I asked around, I said. Seems Gerald's name isn't exactly spoken with fondness here. David's grin was quick. No, he's not a fondness sort of man. Which is why I'm here, to keep him from getting what he wants. And what exactly does he want from me? He paused. Leverage. If Brianna has the letter, Gerald will convince her to use it. Not just to hurt you, but to push you out of your position so he can plant someone else in your place. He's been trying to expand his reach into Harrington coastal voyages for years. I studied him. You sound very invested in my staying right where I am. That's because I am, David said. Your presence is inconvenient for him, which makes it convenient for me. It was a neat answer, maybe too neat, so I decided to test him. I have a piece of information on Brianna, I lied. Something that could discredit her if she tried to use the letter. You want it? His eyes sharpened. If it's real, yes. Then we trade, I said. You give me Gerald's next move. All of it. He didn't hesitate long. Fine. He's planning to have someone approach you at the next port. Not to threaten you, to offer you a settlement. Large sum, no strings on paper. You take it, you step down quietly. But the moment you do, your stake in the company disappears into one of his holding groups. That's the end game. The detail was specific enough to make my skin prickle. I gave him a slow nod. Good, we'll talk again. That night in my cabin, I replayed the conversation in my mind. If David was telling the truth, Gerald's play wasn't brute force. It was a buyout masked as a lifeline, which meant the real battle wouldn't be in threats or blackmail. It would be in who controlled the narrative when the offer came. And I had no intention of letting Gerald Cross write my ending. 2 days later, the aurora mist slid into Charleston Harbor under a thin veil of morning fog. From my balcony, the city skyline looked ghostly, church steeples rising out of the mist, their bells faint against the low rumble of the ship's engines. I'd been expecting him. David's warning had replayed in my mind ever since Bermuda. Someone will approach you at the next port settlement, quiet step down, and your stake disappears. If Gerald's plan was to box me in with a generous looking offer, I'd make sure the box had no walls. I waited until most passengers had disembarked for their tours before walking down the gangway. The pier smelled faintly of tar and salt. A few crew members were handling luggage nearby, and tour operators called out to their groups. That's when I saw him, tall, mid-50s, in a perfectly tailored navy suit that didn't belong on a dock. He carried a slim leather briefcase and wore an expression that was neither warm nor hostile, just expectant. "Ms. Ellis," he asked as I stepped onto the boards. His voice was smooth, a little too polished, like he'd practiced it. "Yes," I said. "I represent a client who would like to make you a proposal. He believes it's in both your interests to resolve certain, overlapping concerns quietly." We sat at a small cafe just off the pier. The fog was beginning to lift, the light cutting sharper across the water. He opened the briefcase with a soft click, sliding a single sheet of paper toward me. "This is a formal offer to purchase your stake in Harrington Coastal Voyages. The sum is significant, and the agreement contains no public disclosure clauses." I skimmed it. The number was high enough to tempt anyone who hadn't been paying attention to the game. And it was clean. No mention of Gerald. No trace of the real reason for the buyout. I looked up. "It's generous. Then we have an understanding?" he asked. I smiled faintly and reached into my own bag, pulling out an envelope. "Before we decide on understandings, you should see what I brought." Inside were high-resolution stills of Brianna, time-stamped security footage of her berating crew, and the documented mortgage transfer she'd rerouted into personal spending. Beneath those was a one-page summary I'd prepared, detailing exactly how such evidence could be used to challenge any transaction involving her and associated parties, in a corporate context. He glanced at the top photo, then at me. "You're implying," "I'm stating," I interrupted, "that any attempt to force me out, even dressed up as a generous offer, will trigger a full review of every asset transaction connected to your client. That includes those with intermediaries, like Brianna. And I have more than enough to make sure the story isn't told in whispers, but in headlines." For the first time, his polished calm wavered. He slid the papers back into the envelope, closing my evidence inside. "You've considered your position carefully." "Very carefully," I said. "And if your client is as smart as you are, he'll realize I'm more valuable as an opponent he doesn't provoke." He hesitated, then gave a small, almost respectful nod. "I'll convey your perspective." Back aboard the Aurora Mist, I stood at the rail as the harbor receded, the fog dissolving into open sunlight. For now, the waters ahead were calm. But in the world Gerald Cross moved in, calm was never permanent, and I was starting to understand that maybe I didn't want it to be. 3 days after Charleston, the Aurora Mist was cruising through calm Caribbean waters when Tom knocked on my office door. "You have a visitor?" he said, his voice measured. When I stepped out into the corridor, I froze. Standing there, dressed in a lightweight linen suit and smiling like he was about to sell me a summer home, was Gerald Cross. "Ms. Ellis," he said warmly, as if we were old friends meeting by chance. "What a pleasure to finally meet in person." Oh, we sat in the captain's private lounge. Tom's idea, to keep this meeting off the public decks. The space was quiet, the only sound the low hum of the engines beneath our feet. Gerald leaned back in his chair, crossing one ankle over his knee. "I think we've both been playing the wrong game," he began. "You've spent energy trying to protect your position. I've spent energy trying to unsettle it. What if we changed the rules?" I kept my tone even. "You're suggesting what? An alliance?" "In a sense," he said. "You have influence in Harrington Coastal Voyages. I have resources and interests that could expand its reach. Together, we could restructure things in a way that benefits us both. And, incidentally, make certain past inconveniences disappear permanently. It was a tempting pitch on the surface. Power and security without the constant skirmishes. But his eyes told a different story. Gerald wasn't here to share power. He was here to bind me to him, to make my position dependent on his goodwill. What if I'm not interested in being dependent on anyone? I asked. His smile didn't falter. Then you may find that being independent comes at a very high cost. I let the silence stretch, the weight of his words settling between us. Gerald, I said finally, I've spent most of my life paying for other people's comfort. I'm done with that. If you want to keep coming at me, I can't stop you. But I can promise you this. I'm not a soft target anymore. For the first time, the warmth in his smile cooled. He rose smoothly, buttoning his jacket. We'll see. As he left, Tom closed the door behind him and turned to me. You know that wasn't his last move. I know, I said. But it's going to be mine. That night I stood alone on the upper deck, the ocean stretching into darkness. For months, my life had been about survival. Against Brianna, against Gerald, even against the fear I'd carry the rest of my life. But now I could feel the end of this storm on the horizon. The fight wasn't over, but I was ready to decide how it ended, and on whose terms. The Aurora mist was 2 days from returning to Portland when Tom found me in the observation lounge. There's a private meeting request, he said, sliding a folded note toward me. From Gerald Cross. He says it's important and that everyone involved will be there. The note named a time and place. The Forward conference room at 7 p.m. tonight. I knew what everyone involved meant, and I knew I couldn't refuse. When I walked in that evening, the room smelled faintly of polished wood and salt air from the deck outside. The long conference table gleamed under the recessed lighting. Gerald sat at the head, his linen suit immaculate. To his right was Brianna, her arms crossed, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. Across from her, Daniel, looking like he'd aged 10 years in a month. At the far end, leaning casually against the wall, was David Quinn, his eyes scanning the room like a chess player studying the board. Ms. Ellis, Gerald said with a welcoming gesture, please join us. We have business to conclude. I took a seat midway down the table, close enough to see every expression but far enough not to be flanked. Gerald began. We've all spent far too much time circling each other. Tonight I want finality. My proposal is simple. You step down from your position, transfer your stake in Harrington Coastal Voyages, and in exchange, I guarantee that neither I, nor anyone at this table, will move against you again. Brianna smirked, clearly satisfied with the idea. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. David said nothing. And if I don't? I asked. Gerald's tone stayed pleasant. Then you force me to use other methods. I reached into my bag and placed 3 envelopes on the table. The thing about methods, I said, is that they work both ways. I slid the first toward Daniel. In here is a copy of the contract Brianna signed with Gerald's associate, promising him a cut of any future marital assets, dated before you were married. Daniel's jaw tightened. He didn't look at Brianna, he stared at Gerald. The second envelope went to David. This one contains financial transfers, tying Gerald's holding companies to a shell account used for laundering money through cruise line contracts. You may find it useful in your competing interests. David's eyes flicked to Gerald, then back to me. A small, amused smile played on his lips. The third envelope I kept in front of me. And this one, I said, tapping it lightly, contains security footage of Brianna's conduct on this ship and proof of misappropriated funds from my 2018 salad mortgage rescue. Copies already sit in a safe deposit box, one my attorney can access if anything happens to me or my position. The silence that followed was heavy enough to press against my ribs. Gerald leaned back slowly, studying me like a man reassessing the odds. Brianna's smirk had vanished. Daniel's hands were clenched on the table, white-knuckled. David looked, for once, genuinely impressed. You've been busy, Gerald said at last. I've been prepared, I replied. So here's my counter-proposal. You leave me and my company alone, and in return, I don't dismantle yours. This is my last and only offer." Gerald's gaze locked with mine for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. But it wasn't warm. "Very well, Miss Ellis. For now, the tie goes your way." He stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked out without another word. David followed, giving me a subtle nod as he passed. Brianna lingered a moment longer, her eyes burning into mine. "This isn't over," she hissed. "It is for me," I said calmly. She left. Daniel stayed behind, staring at the envelope I'd given him. "Mom, I didn't know about any of it." "I believe you," I said. "But believing you doesn't erase what happened. If you want something better between us, it'll take time. And truth." He nodded slowly. "Then I guess I'd better start with both." When I left the conference room, the night air on deck felt cooler, lighter. The game had shifted, maybe ended, maybe just paused. But for the first time, I was the one setting the terms. And whatever came next, I'd meet it head on. The aurora mist returned to Portland under a pale morning sky. The gulls were already circling the docks, their cries sharp and familiar. From the upper deck, I could see the old cannery in the distance, the same one where I'd spent decades working double shifts so Daniel could have a future. It felt like a lifetime ago. Maybe it was. Daniel was waiting near the gangway. No Brianna. No baggage but the kind you couldn't see. We walked in silence down the pier, the boards creaking under our steps. The salty air stung my cheeks, or maybe it was the memories rushing in too fast. The little boy clutching my hand on the way to school. The teenager slamming doors when I told him no. The man who had turned his eyes away when I needed him most. Finally, he spoke. "I don't know how to make this right." "You can't," I said softly. "Not all at once. Some things don't go back to what they were. But that doesn't mean they can't become something else." We stopped at the edge of the parking lot where my car, the same battered sedan that had carried me away from his house months ago, was waiting. He looked at me then, really looked, like he was trying to reconcile the mother in his memory with the woman standing in front of him now. "I should have defended you," he said. His voice was raw, stripped of any excuses. "I thought keeping the peace with her was the only way to hold my life together. But I didn't see that I was letting it break apart in another way." I took a breath. "We can't rewrite the past, Daniel. But we can choose what we carry forward. And I'm done carrying the weight for both of us." His eyes dropped. "I want to carry my share now." For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I reached out, not with the blind forgiveness I might have offered once, but with a cautious, deliberate choice. He took my hand. It wasn't a return to the way things had been. It was something smaller, more fragile, but real. The first knot in a new rope. As I drove away, the harbor receded in my rearview mirror, the ship shrinking against the horizon. I knew the storms wouldn't stop. Gerald might circle back. Brianna might try again. But I also knew I wouldn't face them as the same woman who had climbed into this car months ago, red, cheeked from a slap, and unsure where to go. I was still a mother, still human, but I was no longer the safety net, and as the morning sun lit the road ahead, I realized Daniel and I were both learning, in our own ways, how to stand on our own decks. If you've listened this far, you already know my story. You know about the slap, the eviction, the nights in my car. You know about the cruise ship, the people who tried to push me out, and the battles I never thought I'd have the strength to fight. But here's what you might not know: none of those things were the hardest part. The hardest part was realizing that the person I'd sacrificed for, the boy I raised, the man I loved more than my own safety, could still fail me, and that I could still choose to love him without letting him hurt me again. Family isn't just blood, it's respect, it's truth, and it's the choice every day to show up for each other in ways that matter. For years, I thought giving everything I had, money, time, pieces of myself, was proof of love, but all it proved was that I didn't know where my own line was. Now I do. So here's what I want to leave you with. If you are carrying a weight that someone else put on your shoulders, you are allowed to set it down. If you are giving more than you can bear, you are allowed to stop. And if the people you love cannot love you without taking from you, you are allowed to choose yourself. If this story reminded you of something in your own life, I'd like to hear it. Tell me in the comments. What's one boundary you wish you had set sooner? And if you believe more people need to hear stories like this, share it. Because you never know who might be one, yes, away from losing themselves, or one, no, away from finding their freedom. From my deck to yours, thank you for listening.